Somewhere beneath the haze of the Strait of Hormuz, a U.S. Navy sensor operator watched a blip appear on his screen that should not have been there. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a speedboat. It was a vertical launch signature, rising off the deck of an Iranian corvette that American intelligence had catalogued as a coastal patrol nuisance, nothing more. Within seconds, that assessment was wrong. What just left that launch tube has a name now, Sayyad 3G. And the question spreading through Fifth Fleet Command tonight is brutally simple. Did the United States Navy just lose its head start in the most dangerous waterway on Earth? To understand why this single missile test has rattled naval planners more than almost anything Iran has done in this entire war, you have to understand what has been happening in the Strait of Hormuz since the war began. Since the US and Israeli strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader in February, the strait has not been a shipping lane, it has been a kill box. 17 merchant vessels damaged, 2 captured outright, a dozen seafarers dead or missing, a tugboat sent to the bottom of the Gulf. This is the most disrupted energy corridor in modern history, a quarter of the planet's seaborne oil passing through a channel barely 30 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. And for months, the balance of power inside that channel has rested on one simple fact. American ships could see Iranian threats coming from far enough away to stop them. That fact just changed. The missile that changed it is not new in concept, but its deployment is what should terrify anyone tracking this war. The Sayyad 3G is the naval evolution of Iran's Sayyad 3 air defense family, adapted for vertical launch and fired for the first time at sea from the deck of the Shahid Sayyad Shirazi, one of Iran's newest Shahid Soleimani-class missile corvettes. This is not some rusted patrol boat from the Iran-Iraq War era. This is a 600-ton catamaran-hulled vessel, built largely from aluminum alloy, deliberately shaped to shrink its radar signature. Iran built a stealthier, faster, harder-to-track warship, and then armed it with a missile that reaches out roughly 150 kilometers, travels at speeds approaching Mach 7, and can reportedly engage fighter jets, high-altitude drones, maritime patrol aircraft, and cruise missiles in a full 360 degrees around the ship. For the first time, Iran does not just have a missile. It has a mobile, difficult-to-detect launch platform that can extend a defensive umbrella across nearly the entire width of the strait from a single position. Now I need you to sit with what that actually means, because on the surface, this looks like an air defense missile, something built to protect Iranian ships from American jets. But that is not the full story. That is the story Tehran wants you to believe. Because inside naval doctrine, an air defense missile that can reach 150 kilometers, track high-speed maneuvering targets, and integrate into a naval command network does something else entirely. It changes where American carrier air wings can safely operate. It changes how close U.S. destroyers need to stay to protect their own aircraft. It changes the entire geometry of the blockade operation the U.S. Navy has been running since April. This is the most dangerous kind of weapon in modern warfare. The one that doesn't need to fire a single shot to already be winning. Let's go back to what the U.S. Navy has actually been doing in these waters, because this is where the story gets uncomfortable. Since the naval blockade against Iran went back into effect this month, U.S. Central Command has been running an aggressive interdiction campaign. In the first 24 hours alone, American forces redirected 2 commercial vessels and disabled a third, an oil tanker attempting to sneak toward Karg Island, Iran's economic lifeline for crude exports. During the earlier phase of the blockade this spring, CENTCOM claims to have redirected 142 ships and disabled 9 more over 2 months. This is not a symbolic presence. This is American warships, American aircraft, and American special operations teams actively strangling Iran's ability to move oil, weapons, and cash through its own waters. And for that campaign to work, for that blockade to hold, American ships need one thing above everything else. They need to see the threat before the threat sees them. That is exactly what the Sayyad 3G was built to erase. Here is what should be keeping planners at Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain awake tonight. In the days before this missile test, the United States had already launched 3 consecutive nights of strikes, hitting more than 300 targets across Iran, specifically aimed at missile sites, drone facilities, ammunition depots, communication networks, and coastal surveillance positions. The stated goal was blunt: degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial vessels transiting the strait. Washington was trying to blind Iran's coastline before it could strike again. And less than 2 weeks later, Iran answered by putting a missile at sea, on a ship, with stealth shaping, that doesn't depend on any of the fixed coastal radar sites the US just spent 3 nights destroying. You bomb the shore. Iran moves the threat onto the water. This is the oldest trick in asymmetric warfare, and it is working. Think about what a mobile 150-kilometer air defense umbrella does to the physical map of the strait. At its narrowest point, the shipping channel through Hormuz is barely 33 kilometers wide. A single Sayyad 3G equipped corvette, sitting almost anywhere along the Iranian coastline, can now theoretically threaten aircraft across the entire width of that channel and well beyond it into the Gulf of Oman. That means American F-35s flying escort for tanker convoys, American MQ-9 Reaper drones flagging small boat threats, American P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft hunting for mines. All of them now have to assume they could be engaged from a launch point they cannot see coming, fired from a ship shaped specifically to avoid their own radar. The hunters have just become potential targets. And the worst part is this. American commanders do not know how many of these systems Iran has already quietly moved to sea. This was officially a test. Nobody in Washington believes it was only a test. This is where we need to widen the lens, because Iran did not build this missile, this stealth corvette, or this moment in isolation. This is the culmination of a strategy Tehran has been assembling for years, one built entirely around a single, brutal insight. Iran cannot beat the United States Navy in an open, symmetrical fight. Not close. American carrier strike groups outgun anything Iran can field by an order of magnitude. So Iran stopped trying to win that fight. Instead, it built a strategy designed to make the cost of operating in the strait so unpredictable, so expensive, and so politically radioactive that even a superpower hesitates. That strategy has 3 layers, and the Sayyad 3G sits at the top of all of them. The first layer is denial through chaos. Sea mines laid across shipping lanes. Small, fast attack boats swarming individual tankers. Missile strikes on merchant vessels with no warning. This is why 17 ships have already been damaged and a dozen sailors are dead. Iran does not need to sink the US Navy. It only needs insurance premiums on Gulf shipping to spike high enough that global oil markets panic on their own. The second layer is proxy pressure. Iran does not fight alone in this region, and it never has. Its allied militia networks stretch from Yemen to Lebanon to Iraq, each one capable of opening a second front the moment American resources concentrate too heavily on the strait itself. Every missile Washington has to divert toward defending a ship in the Red Sea is a missile that isn't watching Hormuz. The third layer, the newest and most dangerous, is exactly what we just witnessed: naval air denial. A mobile, harder-to-kill platform that raises the cost of American air dominance itself, the one advantage the United States has never had to question in this entire war. Put those 3 layers together and you get something American planners are only now beginning to say out loud. The Strait of Hormuz may be the most contested piece of water on the planet, and for a brief, dangerous window, Iran may have just found a way to make American air superiority inside it a matter of chance, rather than certainty. Now let's talk about the ship the United States has actually been leaning on to hold this line, because this is where the stakes become personal. For weeks, the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group has been the anchor of American air power in these waters, its Nimitz-class deck launching the F-35s and FA-18s that have carried out strike after strike against Iranian coastal targets. A carrier strike group like the Lincoln does not operate alone. It sails inside a moving fortress of Aegis cruisers and destroyers, purpose-built to form overlapping shields of radar coverage in every direction. But a carrier's greatest strength has always been distance. Keep the flight deck far enough offshore, and enemy coastal weapons simply cannot reach it. That calculation is precisely what a mobile, sea-based 150-kilometer air defense missile begins to complicate. It does not threaten the carrier directly. Air defense missiles do not hunt ships. But it threatens something almost as valuable: the freedom of movement for every aircraft that carrier launches. Every strike package now has to route around a threat envelope that used to not exist. Every escort mission burns more fuel, more time, more risk. In naval warfare, forcing your enemy to fly a longer, more cautious path is its own kind of victory, even if not a single shot is ever fired at the ship that started it. This is precisely why American military assets in this war have already taken losses that Washington does not enjoy discussing. Reports circulating from defense trackers monitoring the conflict describe billions of dollars in American military hardware damaged or destroyed since the fighting began in February, a sobering reminder that even the most dominant navy on Earth is not operating in these waters risk-free. Iran's army has claimed missile strikes against American carrier assets in the Gulf, claims Washington disputes but has not entirely dismissed. Whatever the true scale of that damage turns out to be, the pattern is unmistakable. This war has not been a clean, one-sided demonstration of American power. It has been a grinding, expensive, unpredictable campaign, and the Sayyad 3G is Iran's latest attempt to make it grind even harder. Zoom out from the strait itself, and the picture gets more uncomfortable because Iran was never planning to fight this war using only its own coastline. This is a country that spent decades building what analysts call a ring of proxies, a network of allied militias stretching from the mountains of Yemen to the streets of Beirut to the river valleys of Iraq, each one capable of opening a new front the instant Washington's attention narrows too tightly on Hormuz. Hezbollah forces in Lebanon have claimed ambushes destroying Israeli armor in recent weeks, a reminder that this war has never truly been contained to one battlefield. Yemen's Houthi movement, already infamous for turning the Red Sea into one of the most dangerous shipping lanes on the planet, remains fully capable of reopening that second maritime front the moment Iran needs American warships pulled away from the Gulf. Every one of these fronts exists for the same strategic purpose. They force the United States to spread its most advanced ships, its most capable air defense systems, and its most experienced crews across thousands of miles of contested water, thinning the exact concentration of force that makes the U.S. Navy so dominant in the first place. The Sayyad 3G did not appear in isolation. It appeared as the newest tool inside a strategy built entirely around forcing American power to be everywhere at once, and therefore never quite strong enough anywhere. Meanwhile, the human and economic cost of this standoff is spreading far beyond military planners and intelligence briefings, reaching directly into the wallets of ordinary people who have never heard of the Sayyad missile family and never will. Before this war, roughly a quarter of the entire planet's seaborne oil and a fifth of its liquefied natural gas passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That flow has now been disrupted so severely that the world is facing what analysts are openly calling a global fuel crisis, the worst disruption to energy markets in a generation. Shipping insurers have already priced Gulf transit as a war zone risk, a designation that adds staggering costs to every barrel that makes it through. Major shipping firms have suspended operations in the strait entirely, rather than risk their vessels and their crews. Every damaged tanker, every captured ship, every missile test that raises the perceived danger of these waters ripples outward into fuel prices at gas stations on the other side of the planet, into the cost of shipping goods, into the fragile economics of countries that had nothing to do with starting this war. This is the quiet, unglamorous side of a story built around stealth corvettes and hypersonic interceptors. Wars fought over choke points are never contained to the choke point. That is exactly why America's regional allies are no longer sitting on the sidelines. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar have spent this war quietly deepening the air defense cooperation that already existed with Washington, hosting American assets, sharing radar tracking data, and coordinating escort corridors for the tankers still willing to make the run through Hormuz. Bahrain, home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet's headquarters, has already felt this war directly, with a port worker killed and 2 more wounded in an attack tied to the broader crisis. These are not distant observers watching a superpower duel from a safe distance. These are nations whose entire economic lifeline runs directly through the same water Iran is now contesting with a stealth-shaped missile corvette, and they understand better than almost anyone what happens if American naval dominance in these waters is ever seriously called into question. Naturally, this raises the question everyone in the Gulf region is now asking. Is the United States Navy already too late? Can this threat still be neutralized before it multiplies? To answer that, it helps to look backward, because this is not the first time the Strait of Hormuz has become the center of a shadow war fought over exactly this kind of asymmetry. In the 1980s, during what history now calls the Tanker War, Iran faced a nearly identical problem against a far more limited adversary. Unable to match the naval power arrayed against it, Iran turned to speedboats, floating mines, and shore-based silkworm missiles to make the strait too dangerous for tankers to use safely, eventually drawing the United States Navy directly into the fight to protect Gulf shipping under Operation Earnest Will. That campaign ended with American warships escorting reflagged tankers through the strait for months, and with several deadly, costly clashes at sea before the danger finally subsided. The lesson from that era has never stopped applying. Iran has never needed to defeat the United States Navy outright to win in these waters. It has only ever needed to make the price of operating there high enough and unpredictable enough that the rest of the world starts asking whether it is worth it. 40 years later, the weapons have changed beyond recognition, from crude naval mines to Mach 7 vertical launch interceptors. But the underlying strategy is exactly the same playbook, executed by the same government, in the exact same waterway. What makes this moment different from the 1980s and considerably more dangerous is what sits behind Iran's missile program today. Despite sanctions so severe that basic electronic components reportedly have to be smuggled into the country through shell companies and gray market brokers, Iran's defense industry has proven repeatedly that it can adapt faster than Western intelligence assessments predict. The Sayyad family did not appear from nowhere. It evolved methodically across more than a decade, starting as a modest 75-kilometer system, reverse-engineered from older Soviet-era technology, and growing, generation by generation, into a naval interceptor now approaching hypersonic speed. Every version absorbed the failures of the one before it. Every new test closed a gap Western analysts thought would take years to close. If a sanctioned, war-battered, economically strangled country can put a stealth-shaped corvette to sea armed with this kind of missile in the middle of an active bombing campaign against its own coastline, the uncomfortable question every naval planner in Washington now has to sit with is simple. What does the next version look like, and how much longer does America actually have before it arrives? A Gulf-based naval analyst who has spent years tracking Iranian missile programs put it this way in a private briefing that has been circulating among regional defense correspondents. The danger of the Sayyad 3G was never really about a single missile. It was about proving the concept works. Once Iran shows the world that vertical launch naval air defense can survive at sea on a stealth-shaped hull in the middle of an active war zone, it becomes a template. And templates get copied fast. That is the real fear rippling through Washington right now. Not this one corvette. What comes after it? Because here is the uncomfortable truth about Iran's defense industry that most people underestimate. Despite years of sanctions, despite a supply chain choked at nearly every turn, Iran has proven again and again that it can reverse engineer, adapt, and mass-produce weapons faster than Western intelligence expects. The Sayyad missile family did not appear overnight. It evolved for over a decade, from a modest 75-kilometer system into a Mach 7 naval interceptor, each generation absorbing lessons the previous one exposed. If Iran can put one stealth-shaped corvette to sea with this capability, the working assumption inside American naval intelligence has to be that more are already under construction, and that the next version will close whatever gaps this one still has. But here is where the story pivots, because this is not a simple tale of Iran outsmarting a superpower. The United States Navy did not get to be the most dominant maritime force in human history by standing still, and the response already unfolding in the Gulf proves it. American Aegis-equipped destroyers, the backbone of the Navy's air and missile defense network, are built specifically to hunt exactly this kind of threat. Their SPY radar arrays are designed to track hundreds of targets simultaneously across sea, air, and increasingly space, and they carry electronic warfare suites purpose-built to jam, spoof, or blind an adversary's targeting radar before a missile ever leaves its rail. A stealth-shaped hull reduces radar cross-section. It does not make a ship invisible. It buys seconds, not immunity. And in modern naval warfare, seconds matter enormously, but they are not the same as safety. American commanders also have a tool Iran cannot easily counter: information dominance built over decades of operating in exactly these waters. U.S. reconnaissance satellites, P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft, and undersea sensor networks have been mapping the Iranian coastline and its naval movements for years, long before this war ever began. A stealth-shaped hull may reduce a corvette's radar cross-section on approach, but it cannot hide a ship's home port, its maintenance cycle, or the logistics chain required to keep a vertical launch missile system fed with ammunition. Every Sayyad 3G that gets built has to be manufactured somewhere, tested somewhere, and moved somewhere, and each of those steps leaves a signature that American and allied intelligence services have spent this entire war learning to read. The missile itself may be new. The vulnerabilities of the system that supports it are not. More importantly, the United States is not fighting this alone in the Gulf, and it never intended to. Regional partners have been quietly reshaping the security architecture of the strait itself. Oman has been pushing a formal traffic management proposal to bring structure back to a waterway that has descended into chaos, sitting down directly with Iran's own foreign ministry to try to guarantee safe passage for civilian shipping. A newly formed Persian Gulf Strait Authority is being built specifically to coordinate escort operations and reduce the kind of ambiguity that leads to miscalculation. American officials have been blunt about their position. Talks with Tehran cannot move forward until ships are guaranteed safe passage through these waters. That is not weakness. That is the United States trying to convert a military standoff into a diplomatic one on its own terms, while the Navy still holds the stronger hand. And the strategic reality underneath all of it has not changed. Iran's economy has been gutted by more than a decade of sanctions, further strained by a war that has already costed its supreme leader and a devastating list of senior officials. Every missile Iran fires, every mine it lays, every corvette it risks in these waters is a missile, a mine, and a ship it may not be able to replace quickly. The United States can rebuild a damaged destroyer's air defense picture with a software update and a resupply run. Iran is rebuilding an air defense missile program under sanctions so tight that basic electronic components have to be smuggled in through shell companies and gray markets. This is not a fair fight in terms of industrial capacity, and both sides know it. There is one more dimension to this story that almost nobody outside defense circles is talking about yet, and it may end up mattering more than anything happening in the Strait this week. Every time Iran fields a genuinely new capability under sanctions this severe, it becomes a live demonstration for two much larger audiences watching from the sidelines: Beijing and Moscow. Both governments have spent years supplying components, guidance technology, and diplomatic cover to Tehran, and both have every incentive to see how a Western-style naval air defense concept performs when tested in real combat conditions against the United States military. If the Sayyad 3G platform proves durable, if it survives contact with American electronic warfare and Aegis tracking over the coming weeks, it will not stay an Iranian secret for long. Weapons that prove themselves in the Strait of Hormuz have a long history of showing up years later in far more dangerous hands, refined, mass-produced, and exported to whichever government is willing to pay for them. This war was never just about Iran. It has always doubled as a live-fire laboratory for the next generation of anti-access weapons the United States will eventually have to face somewhere else entirely, in waters far more consequential than the Gulf. So where does that leave the actual question we opened with? Is the U.S. Navy too late to stop Iran's secret weapon? The honest answer is more unsettling than a simple yes or no, and it is exactly why this moment matters. The United States Navy is not too late to counter this specific missile. Aegis defense doctrine, electronic warfare capability, and sheer numerical advantage in warships still tilt overwhelmingly in America's favor inside the strait. But the United States may be dangerously close to too late on something bigger, recognizing that Iran has shifted from a strategy of desperate defense to a strategy of asymmetric innovation under fire. A country that has lost its supreme leader, lost a naval blockade fight once already, and is being struck nightly by American air power, just found a way to put a genuinely dangerous, hard-to-detect naval weapon to sea in the middle of that collapse. That is not the behavior of a country running out of options. That is the behavior of a country that has learned brutally and quickly exactly which options are left. Before we close, I want you to picture someone who has nothing to do with missiles, corvettes, or naval doctrine at all. A merchant sailor, somewhere on a tanker crossing the strait tonight, watching the same radio channel the IRGC has used for months to warn ships away from these waters. He did not choose this war. He is not Iranian, not American, not a soldier in any army. He is one of a dozen seafarers already confirmed dead or missing since this crisis began. one of the 17 crews who watched their own ship take damage in a choke point that used to be nothing more than a routine stretch of open water on a shipping manifest. Every strategic calculation we just walked through, the missile ranges, the carrier positioning, the proxy networks, the sanctions math, all of it eventually comes down to whether that sailor makes it through the strait tonight. That is what gets lost in a story about Mach 7 interceptors and stealth-shaped hulls. The map is not empty water. It is thousands of ordinary people, on ordinary ships, caught directly inside the blast radius of a war between a superpower and a country that has decided the only way to survive it is to make sure nobody feels safe. Think back to where we started. A sensor operator on an American ship watching a blip rise off the deck of a corvette that was never supposed to matter. That single moment is the entire war in miniature. Overwhelming American power on one side, a wounded, sanctioned, cornered adversary on the other, refusing every single rule of a fair fight, because a fair fight was never something Iran could win. The 17 damaged ships, the dozen dead seafarers, the tugboat resting on the floor of the Gulf. Every one of them is a reminder that the most dangerous weapons in this war were never the biggest ones. They were the ones nobody saw coming until it was already too late to stop them. And that is precisely why this single missile test matters so much more than its size suggests. Wars like this one are rarely decided by the weapon that fires the most spectacular shot. They are decided by the weapon that quietly forces the stronger side to change its behavior, to fly a longer route, to keep its carrier a little farther offshore, to spend a little more fuel, a little more caution, a little more hesitation into every single mission. The United States Navy remains, by an enormous margin, the most powerful maritime force ever assembled by any nation in human history. Nothing about one missile test changes that fundamental fact. But dominance and certainty are not the same thing, and for the first time in this entire war, Iran has found a way to inject genuine uncertainty into a waterway the U.S. Navy has spent months trying to control completely. That uncertainty is the real weapon. The missile is just the delivery system. The Strait of Hormuz has not stopped being the most contested choke point on Earth. Tonight, it just became a little more unpredictable. And in a waterway where a quarter of the world's oil and a fifth of its natural gas depend on ships making it through unharmed, unpredictable might be the most dangerous word in the entire English language. Thank you for watching. If this analysis helped you understand what's really happening beneath the surface of the Hormuz crisis, make sure to like this video and drop a comment so more people can see the full picture. We will keep tracking every move in this waterway, because in the Strait of Hormuz, the next headline is never far away.